Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, we have the second part of our look at the second main lie in Lost in Space. Alpha Centauri is a lie. Not to say that a human habitable planet in the Centauri system doesn't exist. The planet is there, yes. Dawn West has been smuggling mouthwatering Kobe beef steaks there for years. Oh, Alpha Centauri is real, very, very real. But the vision of it that exists in the dreams of the colonists isn't. And where did that vision come from? That's the question we'll be looking at today. And do the creators expect us, the audience, to believe in that vision? Let's take a look. Let us begin with a look at a very particular vision, one that is shown to us through the eyes of Penny Robinson, the fair young maiden, the well-educated daughter of powerful parents, the creator of stories and consumers of them. In this scene, she gazes in wonder at the world she expects to arrive at. John and Maureen are off on an adventure. Penny has been left behind to mind the Jupiter. She has just initiated the protocols to expand the Jupiter, and what is very clearly a propaganda video begins to play. The video seems to be unskippable, something the colonists have to watch before expanding the sides of the Jupiter to make their homes habitable. This is very much not a necessary instructional video. It is not a perky and informative safety video. Rather, it is a high-end production value advertisement for the colony. It is meant to appeal to emotions. It is meant to bypass the reason of the colonists' minds and to convince them of how wonderful the colony is through that emotion. It is the very definition of a propaganda film. But who is it for? This video is only supposed to play once the Jupiters have landed at their destination. Anyone who would be watching it is already convinced of how wonderful Alpha Centauri is. The audience has long since decided to take the dangerous voyage. They have struggled and striven to pass the tests. They have sold their lives on Earth irrevocably below and bought fully into the new life on the colony. When this video plays, the colonists should be looking out the window to see for themselves how great this brave new world is. Why does this video want their eyes focused on a tiny display screen inside the Jupiter instead? Penny's response is very telling. She stares at the video with glazed and dreamy eyes and says, "Look at these people. Everyone's abs are so well defined." She's focusing on something positive about the people in this new colony. Shallowly and oddly, their beauty. This might just be seen as establishing her as a teenager, shallow and impulsive by nature, but the rest of her characterization doesn't support this. She isn't shown as that shallow in the rest of the season. Impulsive, thoughtless, yes, but not shallow. Her thoughts might not often turn outwards towards the other around her, but when she does, she's able to see deeply inside of her fellow colonists. And when her thoughts are turned inwards, they are deep and complex, mulling over the great writers of the past. And these writers, the ones who crafted this scene, do not waste a single scene on any one concept. Every scene in this show does many things. In this idle line, Penny, the literature nerd, mirrors the words of another beautiful, highly educated maiden of powerful parents. A girl who appears as a main character in a book that Penny will have read probably many, many times. As she interacts with the shipwrecked characters in this much older story, the fair maid Miranda says, "How amazing! How many wonderful creatures there are here! Mankind is so beautiful! Oh, what a wonderful new world that has such people in it!" Or, as it has been shortened in popular sentiment, Brave New World. The sentiment, the actress's enchantment, these are very deliberate and near. 1,000 actresses have portrayed this scene thousands of times. This scene is very deliberately calling attention to that work that was old before electricity was more than a novelty. For the sake of understanding that reference, let us review the story. An old story, a true story, a story penned by a brilliant writer of Elizabethan England by the name of William S. The first story opens on a storm. A ship at sea is tossed by the waves. Strange lights dance among the rigging like some fey creature. The storm drives the ship ashore on a mysterious island, but they are far from the first to land there. The previous invaders have dominated the island and have suppressed the native life. The shipwrecked crew confronts the situation. Adventures ensue. The clever fellows master the previous invaders and rebuild their ship with hard work and determination. They load the now two smaller ships, with the plunder of the island and then return home. They arrive hailed as heroes by the starving population of the colony, and the plunder of the mysterious island feeds the hungry colonists. In the wake of this, the colonists on their new home listen to the newly arrived colonists and wisely change their ways to ensure that there is never another bout of starvation in this land of plenty. Freed from the chains that bound them, the new colony prospers in ways that the old colonists could never have imagined, eventually leading them from the earth to the stars themselves. What's that you say? The Tempest doesn't go like that? How does the Tempest go? There was magic involved, spells, spirits, and the occult, not logic, science, and engineering. And hard work? Are you saying that Shakespeare never penned such a tale? Well, you're quite right. Of course he didn't. Genius that he was, Shakespeare was an arrogant plagiarist with the ear of the most powerful people in the world and a fortune to maintain. But the man knew how to end a story with a fantastic flourish. And far more importantly, Shakespeare knew how to end a story in a way that would not offend the authoritarian political ideas of the Elizabethan court. However, the relatively unknown William Starsky, bold colonist, great adventurer, and pragmatic author, never had a chance when he went to court and sued Big Billy S. for stealing his story. You see, William Starsky had a history of failed stories. He was not much of a writer. He tended to overwrite, and anything he wrote turned rather boring and dull. Except for one story, a true story, that he wrote to a lady friend of his back in England. The story of how the ship he was on, the Sea Venture, wrecked on a small island off of the Latin America. Wrecked, and then survived, and then rebuilt. He wrote this in a private letter to his lady friend, and William Shakespeare got a hold of it. And from this story, he very plagiaristically created the Tempest. But what does all this have to do with Lost in Space? What does it have to do with a suspiciously ideal colony set in a blatantly less than ideal future? Why? Why does this show take an entire scene to harken back to one of Shakespeare's more criminal acts of plagiarism? You see, Starsky's story was true, and the ending of its third act was a very, very telling about the future of any colony. It is a story of how a fleet of colonists was struck by a storm, a single ship was blown off course and landed on a strange land, where they wintered before rebuilding their wrecked ship into 2 boats and traveling back to Jamestown, only to discover that the safe haven of Jamestown that they had been seeking was a cold and starving mass of near anarchy, because despite having settled in a fertile, lush, and prosperous land, it had no food. Why were the Jamestown colonists starving? The land about was plentiful, the locals were more or less friendly, the soil was rich, there was almost nothing they couldn't eat in the forests. There was literally no reason for the colony to be anything but prosperous. But Jamestown was a centrally planned community, organized by a government a world away, and with no thought about actual human nature put into the design. You see, the government used science, the government used math to calculate, and as Maureen Robinson says, math can't account for human error. Everything was communally owned. Man and woman alike would go out and toil in the fields equally, and everything that they produced would be put into the community coffers. The woman who worked the hardest would get exactly the same amount of goods and food as the woman who mysteriously developed a headache every time the toil got toilsome. The man who brought home hundreds of pounds of venison and turkey and fish ate exactly the same amount of wild game as the man who slept the hunt away in the sun. No one could profit from their work. They worked for the government, they followed the government's orders, and as a result they were indolent and they starved. There was no reward for working harder than anyone else. There was no real reward for working at all. Therefore, there was no risk, and that they could see immediately, to just riding along. Every one of the colonists did the bare minimum work they could get away with, and the colony went through what would come to be known as the starving times, as the communal coffers were emptied by hungry mouths, and winter prevented the gathering of more food. Now, the colonists who had lived out in the wild, as it were, the colonists on the Sea Venture, had lived by necessity under nearly perfectly libertarian principles. They lived in what Don West would call a cashless economy, and they thrived. They brought this idea back to the colony with them. It wasn't until much later It wasn't much later until Jamestown broke up the central planning and shifted the colony onto a system of private property ownership where everybody could make their own choices, benefit from their own work, and suffer from their own mistakes. Where everybody could profit from the labor of their own hands, and the starving time ended with the death of central planning. That was the true ending of the Tempest, colonists throwing off the chains of the governing ideals that had followed them from the old worlds to the new. You can imagine why Mr. Favorite of Queen Elizabeth didn't want to use that ending in his little work of plagiarism. So he made it a love story, a story about brothers reuniting, a story about magic and mystery and fantasy, a story that left any awkward ideals of freedom and individuality back solidly on the island with Ariel and Caliban. But the Alpha Centauri colony is now in the position of the real Jamestown, not Shakespeare's fantastic island. Or the fantastic dukedom that welcomed back Shakespeare's Miranda. You see, Penny won't be settling into her rightful place of power, the Duchess of a welcoming civilization with the Duke's son by her side. Penny Robinson will be arriving a refugee to a starving population on the edge of rebellion, with the only one to back her up, a questionable smuggler. Because Alpha Centauri is a starving colony. Gaunt horses stagger around tattered greenhouses. Hungry humans count their rationed kernels of corn and pray for a ship, any ship, to land and bring them succor. They dream of Kobe beef and fine whiskey. They hope to see the ship come sailing in. By the laws of storytelling, it will, but it won't be the ship they expected, and it won't bring the salvation they wanted. It will, however, bring the salvation they need, because the ships that come sailing in will not be the Resolute carrying the Jupiters, no. It will be the fragments of the broken Resolute rebuilt around the Jupiters. And rebuilt into the two smaller vessels, the Patience and the Deliverance. In the same way, the colonists of the 24th mission to Alpha Centauri will rebuild their own method back through Patience, and then they will bring deliverance to the starving colony of Alpha Centauri. Next time, we'll look at the clues the show left through the character of Dawn West and Judy Robinson that Alpha Centauri is a starving, failing colony. I've left links below to various good books on the Sea Venture and her amazing voyage, and a few online essays if you want something free. My personal favorite is A Brave Vessel. It tells the story in a more narrative tone. It was written by Hobson Woodward and published in 2010. The full title is A Brave Vessel, the true tale of the castaways who rescued Jamestown. Definitely worth a read. Now, what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Am I completely off base here? Leave a like if you agree with my analysis, and leave a comment atomizing my theory like the Resolute if you disagree. Peace out, my wonderful viewers.